Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this media briefing.
Those are largely my comments. We would be happy to take questions, and I'm already seeing some in chat, so I'll hush and see what you would like to ask Jen or Betsy or me.
The next question is from Rob Berry from Pharmaceutical Technology. For those who take compounded drugs via subscription model with a telehealth provider, for example, are patients generally aware how they and their treatment regimen are impacted if the FDA lists a drug shortage as resolved?
I don't know about the communication between telehealth platforms and the patients that they serve. Jen, I'm going to phone a friend here. You got comment on that one?
Yeah, I am unsure how the telemedicine or telehealth folks handle that. At our pharmacy, we certainly start off every conversation with these drugs are available to be compounded while they're on the FDA drug shortage list, so that people know that. And you still have new inquiries about people starting on Tirzepatide today, and I'm like, well, compounded Tirzepatide is winding down. I don't know that you want to start a compounded product if you can't get the commercial product down the line. It's really no need to start this. And so we have, I'm a small independent compounding pharmacy in North Carolina, and we talk to a lot of patients and we text with a lot of patients on a daily basis, and we try to make sure they know that up front because we don't want to pull the rug out from under them. And so we're grateful that the FDA gave both a runway when Tirzepatide shortage kind of went away after the lawsuit, I guess. But anyway, and we were grateful that they gave a runway with the Semaglutide going off the shortage list, because that helps us to make sure that patients are getting taken care of down the line here.
Yeah, and to be clear, our request to FDA, both in the case of Tirzepatide, when they didn't immediately grant what that we call it a runway, an off ramp, but it is a transition period where pharmacists like Jen are getting their patients who are on compounded Tirzepatide or compounded Semaglutide over to a different therapy that is appropriate in the judgment of a prescriber. And that means the patient's going to have to go back to the doctor's office or telehealth platform or whatever. They've got to have a new prescription, and that can take time. So that off-ramp, 60 days for traditional pharmacies, 90 days for 503Bs, will allow Jen to continue to fill a prescription for the compounded version of the drug until the new therapy is prescribed and the patient can get it in their hands. And so this is all about continuation of care, assuring that patients don't experience some interruption of therapy, because all the research shows that abruptly ending these GLP-1 drugs can have potential health consequences for patients. So we are absolutely grateful for FDA for heeding our request in the case of Semaglutide and immediately granting a 60-day and the 90-day off-ramp.
We'll start with Patrick Lester from Seeking Alpha. He has two questions. The first is, given these polling results, have you heard anything from the Trump administration on the compounding issue?
Yeah, at this point thus far, we sent a letter to the transition team raising some issues, putting on their radar some concerns about some areas where regulation actually impedes patient access without demonstrating that it makes patients safer. And we are working on a blueprint document right now to send to the administration on some issues that we would like to see them address. And that includes not only this idea that, let's not impede patient access, but we as an organization are very interested in making sure that FDA and state boards of pharmacy have the data they need to inspect situations when there's been an adverse event. And so as an organization, we are supporting a proposal that would create mandatory adverse events reporting for traditional compounding pharmacies. So we're working in a number of ways to try to get some traction with the administration. It's still early. A lot of those folks aren't even yet confirmed. And so we'll see where that leads.
Great. And similarly, Patrick's next question is, Trump administration policies on Greenland and/or EU tariffs might make Wegovy and Ozempic more expensive or harder to access. Have you heard anything about possible relaxation of compounding restrictions to address these potential challenges?
I have heard nothing in that vein. We are concerned about tariffs overall, not only related to GLP-1 drugs, but a range of other active pharmaceutical ingredient, and have written in the past week or so to the administration to express concern about tariffs and how that might affect the ability of compounders to fill gaps. The ASHP, the American Society of Health System Pharmacists, has also written to the administration expressing similar concerns.
Next question is from Todd Erie at the This Week in Pharmacy outlet. With persistent drug shortages, how do you see compounding pharmacies evolving to fill critical gaps in patient care while ensuring compliance with FDA guidelines?
It's a great question, Todd, and thanks for being here on the call. Um, I mean, the ability of compounding pharmacies to fill these gaps has been around for generations. There's new focus on it because the scope and scale and duration of this shortage of GLP-1s. But this is what compounding was made for. If you talk to compounders, they will tell you stories of all manner of patients that they have helped for a very short period of time to fill gaps when FDA-approved drugs are not available. Go back 2 years ago to summer and fall and into winter 2022 into 2023 when amoxicillin suspension was in shortage and urgently needed. Parents were frantic, and it was compounding pharmacies that stepped in and were able to prepare compounded copies of the FDA-approved drug in order to get those children the medication that they needed. We can tell stories of patients who are in chemotherapy and need magic mouthwash. That's a compounded preparation to help alleviate some of the mouth sores. That's something that compounders do. And so shortage after shortage after shortage, compounding pharmacies fill those gaps. And I think this survey shows that many Americans are aware that compounders do that and support the idea of doing that. So that is one. If you wonder what keeps me awake at night, all this focus right now on compounding, and frankly, some of the opportunism we're seeing in the compounding space, I grow concerned that it may undermine the ability of compounding pharmacies ongoing to do what compounding was intended to do: fill gaps in the drug supply or create custom medications when there's no commercially available FDA approved drug.
Great. Next question is from Dave Knapp with On the Pen. Regarding compounded versions of GLP-1 medications, patients generally place a high level of trust in their safety and efficacy. However, many express a desire for greater transparency about the source of the API, especially concerning 503A pharmacies that are not subject to CGMP standards. Would the Alliance for Pharmacy Compounding support a policy aimed at increasing transparency in this area?
It's a great question, Dave. And I would say, well, that depends. There are some very good reasons that compounded drugs do not come with the same warnings about adverse events, side effects, and that sort of thing. Tenille, I hope you're listening in. I'm phoning another friend on this one. Can you talk a little bit about this issue and why things are different for compounded drugs than they might be for FDA-approved drugs?
Sure. So FDA-approved drugs go through double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trials, and that is what um, contributes to the information in their labeling. So they're required to list side effects that patients experience during these clinical trials. Compounded medications are not FDA approved. They do not go through the FDA approval process. They don't undergo clinical trials. So they don't have any specific labeling that can be attached to them to determine or describe these sorts of side effects, which is why they're not required to. So a pharmacist obviously has a responsibility to counsel a patient when the patient picks up a prescription or provide information for the patient about expected side effects. They don't have required labeling of these side effects, if that makes sense. Is that complete enough?
It does, and thank you, Sheila. And I think part of the issue is, I mean, there are some who would say, well, if the compounded drug is made with the same API, same formulation, et cetera, can't you just put the side effects that are the same as for the FDA-approved drugs? I don't think the drug makers would ever agree to compounding, adopting those sorts of disclosures based on the drug makers' research. Now, are compounded drugs FDA approved? No. Should that be disclosed? We recommend, as an organization, our best practices says, yes, compounding pharmacies should indicate that compounded drugs are not FDA approved and can add, but they adhere to state and federal law and the standards of the U.S. Pharmacopeia. And frankly, if someone wanted to propose that, I think we would have a hard time opposing it. It's a very reasonable ask. Again, it is not current law that disclosure has to be made, but we do recommend it to our members.
There's a lot of people that make the fallacy jump that just because they're not FDA approved means that they're unsafe, which is not true. Jen, I think that maybe you were going down that path.
Yeah, I was going down that path, and transparency for the API. I mean, we talk to providers about that all the time at my pharmacy because they want to know, where are you getting it? What are you doing? How do you get it? And how is this working? Why can you get it? And so we have had that conversation with them. We're able to produce a certificate of analysis that we get that comes with the product that shows it is what it is and it's gone through testing. And so we make sure we're buying from a FDA registered reseller, repackager, that has all those steps in place, that they've tested the product and that they can tell me what the product is. And so I have to work with a trusted vendor in that situation to make sure that those are good APIs. So I don't go through my email about the 20 people that send me an email today and say, boy, do I have a deal for you today. We don't use those people for our vendors. We use people that we trust, that we know are doing things the right way, much like I want my staff to be doing things the right way.
Yeah, and when I talk about opportunism in this space, some of the sort of marketing that Jen has just mentioned to you is a part of that. So relying on trusted vendors, having certificate of analysis, all of that sort of stuff is really important. And any pharmacy worth its salt can show you those documents.
Now, Jess Cairns from Inside Health Policy asks, any comments on the new OFA lawsuit against FDA over the end of the semaglutide shortage?
Yeah, I would start any comment by saying we are not parties to that lawsuit. I read the brief last night, got it yesterday. It looks remarkably similar to the brief they filed against FDA for the resolution of the Tirzepatide shortage, and the claims are identical. They are saying FDA was cavalier in abruptly ending the shortage, that they relied on incomplete data, and that they should have followed notice and comment rulemaking. One thing I do notice in the brief is that they double down a little bit on the argument about the need for FDA to make to do notice and comment rulemaking. And I believe, as I read it, it's in response to the brief FDA filed last week, taking OFA to task in some of its claims, but largely the lawsuit is the same. I would, and I'm not a lawyer, but I think we need to continue to watch the OFA versus FDA, and now with Lilly intervening, Tirzepatide lawsuit, because how the court rules in that one, and we're within, I think, a month or so of there being a hearing and then the court making a ruling, as goes the Tirzepatide lawsuit, will go the Semaglutide suit because they are so similar. So that's where that's my understanding at present.
Next, we have Edward Marino from Sherwood News says, I've seen compounding pharmacies themselves, particularly those that sell GLP-1s, market them simply as a cheaper alternative to the name brand drug. I really don't often see them marketing it as a way to get modified versions that are not commercially available. Curious about your thoughts on how compounding pharmacies could do a better job of bridging that knowledge gap with consumers.
Well, if I understand the question, I'm forgive me, I'm not sure it's so much about a knowledge gap as it is claims that pharmacies or compounders are able to make about compounded drugs. And the fact is, under federal law, there's not much that compounders can say about a compounded drug. They can say that it compounded semaglutide made with the same active pharmaceutical ingredient in Novo Nordisk, Wegovy, and Ozempic. Perfectly legal claim. You can't call it a weight loss drug. You can't say it's good for diabetes. You can't say that it's a generic drug. Compounded drugs are not generics. And so you can't even say that they're safe and effective. Safe and effective have legal meanings under federal law and with FDA. What concerns me is this focus that we're now seeing on the price of the compounded drug. And indeed, some compounding pharmacies and certainly telehealth platforms are marketing almost exclusively the price of the drug. In my view, that's poking the bear. The price of a compounded drug is not a legitimate reason for prescribing or dispensing the compounded drug. We've already talked about the two circumstances when a compounded drug is called for, and when we inject price into the discussion, particularly into the debate that's raging in Congress over the price of drugs. I think that's putting compounding in a position of potential competition with FDA-approved drugs. And compounding was never intended to compete with FDA-approved drugs. It was intended to fill gaps that FDA-approved drugs, the makers of FDA-approved drugs could not fill. And so, focus on price concerns me. Now, having said that, I'm realistic enough to understand that in this era, extended shortage of a blockbuster drug that is substantially cheaper for compounders to produce than the price of the FDA-approved drug. There is price is a factor. I believe there are patients who are going to their prescribers and saying, I want to be on this stuff. There's no way I can afford the FDA-approved drug. Can you please put me on a compounded drug because I understand that it is cheaper. That is absolutely happening. Again, the purist in me says that's not a legitimate reason for dispensing a compounded drug. Jen, do you putting you on the spot? You have more to say about that and what you're seeing from your patients?
Yeah, we've seen an increased demand. We've seen a lot of demand because some of the insurance companies have stopped to cover it. So, like the North Carolina State Employees Health Plan made the decision. They had roughly 22,000 patients using commercially available GLPs. And at the beginning of the year, they stopped. Actually, it was probably in the fall of last year. They stopped all coverage of GLPs for weight loss. So they had 20-some thousand people. Some were on them for diabetes, but a lot were on for weight loss. I always say the state employees of North Carolina are probably the least healthy people in the state of North Carolina, but they stopped covering it for weight loss. And so we saw a lot of those people scrambling to figure out how to get coverage because those people can't afford to pay whatever the out-of-pocket, $1,200, $1,300, $1,500 a month cost of those drugs are. And so you saw a lot of people scrambling for continuation of coverage because of insurance decisions where it makes the drug completely inaccessible to the patient. And so that's when cost has become a patient access issue. We got a lot of conversations about drug pricing in this country. We're the only country in the world that allows pharmacy benefits manager in the middle, and drugs cost more than anywhere in the world. So I don't know. You can figure that out of if that plays a part in this. But I think we're going to see hopefully some changes coming down the line with the role that PBMs do play in here, and hopefully we can get prices down that patients can afford to pay for things, and insurance companies can afford to pay for drug products to make patients healthier.
Yeah, and I want to add, just related to the resolution this past Friday of the Tirzepatide shortage. We don't have good data. I've told many of you that. I don't have hard numbers, but anecdotally, I think it's commonly understood that there are many, many more Americans on compounded semaglutide than were on compounded Tirzepatide. So there are going to be an awful lot of those folks. They're going to need to take advantage of the 60 and 90-day tail off-ramp to transition. A big concern for us is that a lot of those patients, when they are transitioned to the FDA-approved drug, are going to have sticker shock at the pharmacy counter. They're going to suddenly realize that they're not going to be able to afford the FDA-approved drug, and they're going to immediately stop the therapy. And again, there are potential health consequences related to that. So if I sound like I'm talking about out of both sides of my mouth about price, maybe I am. I'm concerned about a focus on price related to compounded drugs, but I also understand that many patients are benefiting from this wonder drug because of the reduced price, generally speaking, of the compounded versions of the drugs.
You and Catherine Moon from Close Concern says, thank you for this presentation and the helpful Q&A session. I wanted to clarify, is the U.S. Pharmacopoeia monograph available for semaglutide or tirzepatide for compounders to follow? I'd love to know what standards compounders use and regulations needed to make copies of GLP-1 RAs, as this is often the argument against compounded products. Do you believe that there should be more oversight on the safety, quality, efficacy?
Tenille? And by the way,
Yes.
but
This is
Tenille,
coming to me.
yeah, folks, we didn't introduce her. Tenille Davis is Chief Advocacy Officer for the Alliance for Pharmacy Compounding and many years of experience in sterile, non-sterile compounding pharmacies.
Yeah, thanks, guys. So yeah, I'm a pharmacist by trade. I do advocacy work now for the industry, but there is no USP monograph for semaglutide or tirzepatide. That includes for the commercially available FDA-approved product. So in order for an active pharmaceutical ingredient to be used in a compounded product, that has to meet one of three criteria. It has to have a USP or NF monograph, or be part of an FDA-approved product, or be on a certain list that's published by the FDA. So because semaglutide and tirzepatide are part of FDA-approved products, they're allowed to be used by compounders in these compounded products. The package insert of these products has the exact concentration and excipients that are in these formulations. So this recipe isn't something that a pharmacist would need a USP kind of compounding formulation to use in order to make these formulations. There's lots of tests though that the pharmacies have to perform on these sterile products before they're released to patients. So when they are in initial formulation development, so that when they start making these products, they have to undergo stability studies that show the product retains the correct potency over the beyond use date of the product, and that there's no impurities in the product. They have to do container closure integrity studies to show that the vials that they're dispensing in can retain potency and purity over the life of the product. They have to do antimicrobial effectiveness testing on the product to show that the preservative can retain the sterility of the product. And then with each batch of these products that they produce, they have to do sterility and endotoxin testing. So I know that there's a lot of misinformation in the media about what's in these products, but if you talk to a pharmacist that's actually making these, they can go through all the tests they've performed on the product, and they're sure that what's in the vial is what's supposed to be in the vial. Did I miss any tests or any
Well, one of her
clarification, Jen?
one of her questions, Tenille, if I heard correctly, was about how do you know the recipe? How do you know the formula?
Yeah, so like I said, it's in the package insert. So this was never a secret. The package insert lists the active ingredient concentrations, all the excipients and preservatives. So the compounders that make copies of these products just follow that recipe, exactly. Jen, did I miss anything?
No, I think you got it all. I got it all, Tenille. And so I use some of the product that I purchased from a 503B outsourcing facility, and so they have to do similar tests, right, to get longer dating and that type of thing. And so you get into, there's a lot of testing to prove the potency of the product, and it's a lot of testing to make sure it's stable for the duration that the patient is using that. And there's even more testing if you're putting in a multi-dose vial, like Tenille was talking about. And so there's testing that goes on. I know people like you to think there's not a lot of testing, and that we're just making things and nobody's testing anything, but we do test product and send it out to analytical labs to make sure that what we do is right. And I always use that old adage, if I wouldn't give a product to my mother, then I shouldn't give it to a patient, right? That keeps you safe. And that's what we teach to staff. If somebody goes, I don't know if I did that quite right, but just let it go. I'm like, would you give it to your mom? And they go, no, then we're going to remake it, right? That's my safety test at the end of the day. If you won't give it to your mom, we're not giving it to a patient. With that, do you think there should be more oversight on safety, quality, and efficacy? Kat asked. I think we've got great deal of oversight whether people follow the current regulations is a different story, right? There's a lot of regulations that are out there. And so we need to make sure that we're practicing at the highest level we can practice at, not the lowest level that just gets us by to take care of patients. Again, if you wouldn't give it to your mom, you shouldn't give it to a patient. And as long as we keep those guidelines in place, we tend to do all right. I like to, I've got all these friends, all your social media friends are like, oh my God, are you compounding GLPs, right? Everybody that you've never heard from since high school is like all of a sudden your best friend wanting GLPs. And, we try to tell that whole story about what we do and why we do it. Everybody knows compounding now because of GLPs. And so I sat next to a guy on the airplane going to Las Vegas last week. And I said, I'm a compounding pharmacist. And he whipped around and said, do you make those weight loss drugs? And so we've learned a lot of that. I always talk to people about, I like to see people face to face, right? I like to see my patients face to face. I like for them to come into the pharmacy, pick up their drug. We can touch it. We can show them how to use it and all of that. That helps a patient to discern the quality of the product. If they walk into your pharmacy and go, you've walked into that restaurant one time along the way, right? Where you go, I don't know if I want to eat here. It should be the same when you walk into a compounding pharmacy. Anybody can walk in. I'll show them the lab and where we make things because I'm proud of that. I don't want to hide it in the back room, right? You're proud of those type of things. And so I think we've got a lot of focus on the safety, quality, and efficacy in the marketplace. And I think patients have to do a little bit of homework to make sure they're picking the best pharmacy for them as well.
I think there's been a lot of confusion about the difficulty of manufacturing peptides versus compounding. So you have to remember, compounding pharmacists are taking active pharmaceutical ingredients that are manufactured by FDA registered manufacturers and putting it into a finished dosage form. We are not doing peptide synthesis. So we get our API from companies that is their expertise, and then we have our own expertise.
I think that concludes our call for today. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.